Well, welcome everybody to the latest in our installments of Ship Management International podcasts. We're very delighted today to have in the studio today, our podcast studio, Ben Richardson, who's Chief Executive Officer of the Sulnox Group. Now, decarbonisation emissions, one of those key areas is dominating shipping. And certainly, as the shipping industry starts to look towards issues like geopolitics and digitalisation, the need to keep emissions down is there. But it's driving in a lot of innovation within the industry itself. And this is really something that we can really touch a lot on today, talking to Ben. Now, Ben has been CEO of the Sulnox Group PLC since May of 2021, leading the company's mission to transform fuel efficiency and reduce emissions through innovative green technologies. His focus has been on scaling Sulnox globally across marine, mining, power generation, rail and logistics, so we can deliver practical and sort of instant solutions, I guess, to some of the toughest challenges in the climate crisis. And under his leadership, Sulnox has grown its footprint and positioned itself as a sustainability-focused partner to industries under real pressure to decarbonise. But we all have a life before our current jobs, and before Sulnox, he had a career at Deutsche Bank, where he held senior leadership roles in risk management for the investment bank. And by his own admission, that experience in finance and international business strategy has helped him bridge innovation with commercial deployment, ensuring its technologies don't just work in the lab, but scale across the world. Welcome, Ben. How have I done with the introduction? Is that about right?
I think it's brilliant. You've been very generous and everything's spot on. So thank you very much for having us today, Sean.
No problem at all. Well, we bumped into each other at Posidonia a month and a half ago. And, again, an industry event that was teeming with people, but very much sort of driven by this whole need for innovation, decarbonisation, emissions. How did you find Posidonia this year? What were your reflections?
Yeah, I really noticed that Posidonia has moved on from talking about whether shipping can decarbonise to how, and importantly, how fast it can decarbonise. So it's definitely a stronger focus about practical implementation. A big avenue was around biofuel availability, and then how we're going to meet the ever-burdening regulatory compliance married with commercial deployment. So I think the new emissions framework from the IMO was top of everybody's list, and still talking about the economics of the alternative fuels and whether solutions are really going to be capable of delivering these efficiency gains in any time soon.
With regards to net zero, though, I mean, we talk to the Secretary General of the IMO all the time, and Arsenio is a good friend of ours, and he comes to London Shipping Week and what have you. But what do you think is going to happen on that? Because it was scuppered at the last minute through efforts by the US to sort of get it off the agenda. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think, unfortunately, whilst we all want to move towards these alternatives as quick as we can, I think the reality is that fossil fuels will still power 95% of shipping by 2030 and really only start to decrease after 2040 and maybe even still be 50% of the power in 2050. So my own view is that biofuels are actually going to accelerate a lot faster than people think in shipping. But that obviously comes with a lot of issues itself around availability and cost. But they really can make a big difference. And we can talk about the specifics of how they work, but on the face of it, they can be drop-in replacements that reduce the overall carbon footprint and tick a lot of boxes today, as long as you manage them properly.
So before we get into the sort of the meaty stuff, Ben, I mean, this whole issue about environment and climate, what got you into it in the first place? Because I know it's very, very trendy and, high on the agenda now, but it's certainly, it is, we still have to power ahead. We still got industries that are still going to be using oil, but what got you into the environment and climate issues in the first place?
I'm not ashamed to say that in the early to mid 90s, I was studying geography and I was at university college. And one of the things I really focused on even back then was paleoceanography and paleoclimatology. So focusing on over the eons that the Earth's been around, what the climate cycles have done, and was really interesting because it was sort of at the time of Kyoto and people were starting to realize that it was really us, the human race, that has caused climate to warm quite so fast. And we're actually supposed to be in a period of climate cooling as we move further away from the sun in our elliptical orbit. But obviously we've got unprecedented warming, and it really is the speed of that warming that's causing so many weather issues today. and so many out of the ordinary issues that we see on the news now very frequently. So it's been a long time in my mind, always something I've been interested in. And then when I sort of was winding up my banking career, I got this wonderful opportunity to get involved in this company that has the ability to reduce not only liquid hydrocarbon usage, but the associated emissions dramatically. And really, around the black carbon is where we're super strong. We can reduce about 90% of the black soot that comes out of an exhaust, be it a ship's funnel or a generator or even a car or a truck. So it's really been very close to my heart, learning about albedo and how the ice used to reflect the sun's rays back into the atmosphere. And that's why we had a more slowly warming climate than we do today, where the black carbon is now being seen to warm the Arctic 3 to 4 times faster than everywhere else. So, yeah, it's been a long time and a long passion. And whilst it's trendy today, it really continues to be a passion and why I love running this company and very privileged to do so.
Looking at, we got listeners here who can be listening in on this podcast, and really just for their benefit, Ben, before we go into sort of more of the sort of technical side of this, can you just explain the difference between alternative fuels as well as the sort of solutions that companies like Sulnox are doing? Because you're still working with the hydrocarbons, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And we think that we are the decarbonisation solution because we can give a practical alternative to today's fuels and still make a big impact so that, if you like, the troubles of tomorrow can be lessened by the actions that we do today. So, on a big picture scale, we've all heard about batteries, and I myself have a hybrid car, but batteries obviously have insufficient power density to be able to support the big ships, but great that they can now be used in short haul ferries and offshore vessels, but they still will never be able to support long distance voyages. And then, bigger picture, the alternative fuels are things like methanol, ammonia, and many of the other things that we hear about, like hydrogen, which actually will require a whole new infrastructure to be useful to the marine industry. And today, unfortunately, that's going to require a lot of cost. Many of them are potentially hazardous, and we need to work around how we can deal with crews who've been reducing in cost, reducing in complexity, and will now have to be trained more to deal with the potential issues that can arise from ammonia and hydrogen being explosive in its nature. So the real alternative fuel, as I alluded to in the short term, is biofuel, and that's really where we can make a big difference today to today's liquid hydrocarbons. So keeping today's fleet with its 20 to 25 year life cycle on a vessel, keeping that going, benefiting the circular economy, not charging too much for an industry that frankly pollutes only around 3% of the world's emissions, but moves more than 90% of the world's goods. It's, an industry that we all rely on and almost gets a bit of a bad rep because you can see the black smoke when a ship comes into port. But reality is that transportation across the world is what's causing the majority of greenhouse emissions.
Ben, one thing I wanted to ask, looking at the complexity of all of these solutions that are out there in the marketplace, but shipping is a big fragmented industry. Okay, you've got a lot of, as you say, you're involved here in mining, in trucks, in shipping, in all forms of the shipping sector, right the way across marine. It's very, very fragmented. What's the reaction coming from the industry towards solutions such as Solnos? I mean, are they taking a lot of persuading?
You know the shipping industry as well as I do. I think there's a great fear of change, and rightly so. We see the consequences of when shipping gets it wrong, and you get the likes of oil leaks or damage to reefs, etc. So what we see though is there's a definite push towards solutions like Sonox, which require zero capital expenditure to achieve fuel savings and emissions reductions. So there is an increasing willingness to try and to spend money on decarbonizing. And our biggest customer is actually a company called Eastern Pacific Shipping, and they've actually spent about $2.5 billion trying various solutions as part of their decarbonization or efficiency plans, if you like. Anything from anti-fouling paints to flatten the rotors to propulsion improvement devices or even lubrication on the hulls. So there is a willingness to invest in the right products. But the reality is that, unbeknownst to me, coming from an investment banking background, where we measure everything, I was frankly amazed at how fuel consumption is not measured in the marine industry. But what's been happening over the last 5 years, and I guess some kudos to the regulation, is that now there's money being spent on monitoring fuel consumption, and we see the advent of SFOC, or specific fuel oil consumption, and high frequency monitoring of fuel to justify reductions in fuel consumption throughout a calendar year for the SEEMP reporting as to how ships are actually decarbonising or reducing their carbon footprint. So there's definitely money there, especially for products like Sulnox that don't require significant capex or many years to pay back their initial investment. But it all needs to be knitted together. I mean, Sulnox is great with its 3 to 5% fuel saving in marine, and with probably a 4 to 6 week payback period. But it should only be part of every other efficiency gain and efficiency plan that every ship owner needs to get involved in today.
Are you getting stronger take up from certain vessel sectors or certain geographic sectors in all of this? Because it's, as I said, it is a very fragmented industry. And I think, and when we were talking earlier about, the methanols and the ammonias and the hydrogens, they're lacking infrastructure. They need massive amount of training, as you rightly said, Ben. You've got an aging seafarer population, and suddenly you're going to have to train them on handling ammonia as a fuel. There's a lot involved. But here you've got a solution coming across that is dealing with the normal fuel that a vessel will have. And that must be a little bit easier for the industry to digest and to swallow, really. But are you seeing more take up from certain parts of the world? Are you seeing that certain types of vessels are, depending, I suppose, on their charterers, because the charterers are going to be demanding things, aren't they? What are your thoughts?
So the beauty of the product, it works with every liquid hydrocarbon. So it will work with MGO, MDO, very low sulfur and ultra low sulfur diesel, as well as the traditional HSFO as well. So it's a simple pour-in product. And that's what gives us an advantage. It can be delivered to any port, especially with our partner, Drew Marine, that gives us access to about 2,500 ports. So we're very lucky that we've now got the infrastructure in place to mitigate the difficulties in the global nature of the shipping industry. When we look at which types of vessels, it's the main marine fleet at the moment that's taken it up. And that's because if you've got container fleets, they do the same journey. They burn, 100 tons of fuel a day. Very easy to see the fact that they're only burning 95 tons a day. They've invested in that high frequency monitoring that enables them to perform as well. So the bigger the ships with the best metrics available to them, those are the ones where we see the biggest impact, and those are the fleets that are adopting fastest across the globe. Having said that, it's a product that works with the cruise industry. Cruise obviously very concerned about the pollution aspect coming into port and to getting frowned upon, and soon I believe to start getting charged for emitting in port. And electrification is not always possible. So anything like Sulnox that can reduce that black smoke so dramatically is something that we're seeing a great take up from as well. But you're right in terms of the charterers seeing stronger pick up from charterers who are demanding cleaner, more efficient vessels. And it's good for the owners because then they attract a better hire or a longer charter period. And then with reduced fuel consumption or better fuel efficiency, you get better CII scores, and that obviously helps the owner as well, and avoid downgrades and future penalties or restriction is super important as well. So yeah, I think the big fleets and the biggest vessels are where we see the biggest uptake. We're dealing with about 100 different shipping companies now, and also some managers now looking to promote Sulnox across their managed fleets. Indeed, those charterers very interested in anything that can save them money as well as have the most efficient, cleanest vessels.
Now, you mentioned Eastern Pacific Shipping, EPS. Now, I think that's a lot of vessels there. I think you're saying 30 to 50 vessels or so involved. Can you give us an idea of what's sort of involved in that and how you actually service the ships? Because presumably you've got to get the product out to port, haven't you?
Yes. So the Eastern Pacific relationship started about 2.5 years ago. It started with them trying Sulnox on 8 vessels, and those were those big tankers and bulkers and container ships that I mentioned. They saw a 3 to 5% fuel saving, but they also saw reduced carbon deposits and sludge generation. So Sulnox has a benefit to cleaning and lubricating the engines as well. So that's what led them to then put us across 30 vessels. And that relationship over the last year has now grown to more than 50 vessels and a significant shareholding, which is increasing as well. So in terms of the logistics, yeah, it's about finding we've got Solnox now available in 11 ports across the world, and those are all the marine hubs. So Singapore and Rotterdam and Houston, we have the product made there, so low carbon footprint to get to the vessels that call in those ports. But we also have stock in Gibraltar, in Suez, in Jebel Ali, and in Australia, and now in China and South Korea as well. So we have stock available all over the world. And then with Drew, as I mentioned, we can really get it anywhere as well. So servicing the ships is easy in those hubs because the agents, we send to the agents, and then the agents get the product to the vessels, and then it's just simply a matter of pouring in the product before bunkering, which makes it very easy, always the same dosage ratio, and always simple for the crew, and non-hazardous, which is another thing that separates us from others in the industry.
And looking, I mean, yeah, there's advantages here. And I think what you're saying obviously cleans the engine, lubricates the engine, but it also, I guess, ensures that you are burning more of the fuel. Is that what you're saying as well?
It's actually a mechanism that it comes from emulsification technology. So emulsifiers allow two things that don't want to mix and to stay stable. And in this instance, it's taking advantage of small amounts of water that you will get either through condensation or just through the fact that fuel is hydrophilic and it attracts water. So we take that very small microscopic amounts of water and we emulsify those into the large fuel droplets. And what this enables is an improvement of combustion. In an engine, you will get what's called primary atomization, which is burning the fuel, but not all of the fuel particles will burn completely. With our product, we enable something called secondary atomization, which is where the small amounts of water vaporize into steam and smash the big particles into smaller ones, which means there's more oxygen available to the smaller particles, and more of those particles burn more completely. And that's what drives the fuel efficiency savings, as well as those performance improvers to the engine around removing carbon deposits and adding lubricity.
And now this is all new innovation. And as I said before, the industry is very fragmented, it's highly diversified, lots of different types of owners. The Greeks operate in a completely different way to the Chinese or the Singaporeans and what have you. Before we come on to the regulator, what's the biggest sort of hurdle to getting this message out into the market? Because to me, it sounds great. The very fact that you can still carry on using the fuel that you've always used. You've got this product that's going to come in and assist in that whole process. It's going to be working with other elements that's going to help you achieve your overall reduction in emissions and what have you, your overall footprint. But as I said, shipping is fragmented. They all have different views. But what are the biggest obstacles to market on all of this?
Well, firstly, yes, Sonox is a new innovation, but it's taking advantage of something that every mechanical engineer will have learned about, how water can improve combustion and reduce emissions. But what we've done is created a chemistry rather than a unit or a homogenizer or something that injects water. And Sonox keeps water stable in the fuel almost indefinitely. And that's where the green innovation has come in. So no need for hardware, I suppose. And you're right, it is a fragmented industry. Everyone is different, but they all require fuel consumption reduction. So everybody is very interested in the same things, saving money and not costing a fortune to achieve that. So if we look at the industry, though, I think what we find is that many have come before us promising fuel savings, promising emissions reductions. But unlike us, they're not proven either in the laboratory or in the real world. So there's a lot of skepticism that's come from the additives before Sulnox. But the fact that we've got now over 100 patents and we are in some of the largest fleets and proving these fuel savings and emissions reductions means that we are gaining market share and notoriety very quickly. But it's not an industry that moves fast. It's an industry that's still cautious. But with these marquee names like Eastern Pacific and in the Greek market, Spring Marine, who've adopted across their 35 vessels, the industry is starting to sit up and to listen. And we're starting to win awards because of the impact we can have on today's fuels. But I think bigger than this, yes, there's a great incentive to burn less fuel, and it helps with your EU ETS costs. It helps with your CII, as I mentioned. But what will come, I believe, and I'm pushing for, is the industry is not yet incentivized to reduce its emissions. So it's actual emissions that it emits. Not all very low sulfur fuel oil is the same. Some is like HSFO, some is like MGO, and therefore it will emit different amounts. And what continuous emissions monitoring will enable is monitoring real emissions reductions with the use of the product. And that's where I see the barriers to entry rapidly reducing, especially if we can bring along a carbon benefit to that as well.
But you're also still in a market that's going to have owners opting for methanol, LNG, ammonia, hydrogen. Everybody now talks about there'll be a whole range of fuels or transitional fuels that are going to be there. Let alone batteries for the ferries going between one small island of the north of Norway to another small island. They can coal iron at each port. But how do you see all of that sort of? What do you think the future is going to be looking like, would you say, Ben? Are we going to be looking at a whole range of solutions for different issues?
Well, I think they all have a place. I think that it's right that you can't really mandate whether methanol is better than LNG, is better than ammonia. I think the industry needs to make its own decisions. I see LNG providing the biggest alternative in the short term. But obviously, it comes with the need to reduce the methanol slip that's associated, particularly with maneuvering as well. So I can see LNG making up as much as sort of 25% of the industry come 2050. But I still see traditional fossil fuels making up a similar amount. I see biofuels at 15 to 20%. And then, if you like, maybe methanol and ammonia making up another 20% with a bit of. Well, there's a lot of talk at the moment about nuclear. Don't think that much as I think it's a perfect solution, unfortunately, with the geopolitical nature of the world, I'm not sure that's going to get legs anytime soon.
When I was a journalist on Lloyd's List, we always talked about the ultimate casualty, which was an LNG carrier, catching fire or exploding in the Bay of Tokyo or something, and I think, the thought of a nuclear powered vessel coming into port and with everything that's going on. But it is part of that discussion. With regards to the solutions that you're offering and other companies that work alongside you are offering, what's the view of the regulators on all of that? Because, I mean, what are they saying to you as far as, what you should be doing or what the industry should be expecting?
Sonos and similar products aren't actually part of any regulation at the moment. Now, this is something that we are looking to change because we are seeing dramatic reductions in CO2 for those that use the product. I mean, we've got a land-based generator study showing around 20% reduction in CO2. So it's an enormous amount of CO2 reduction that can be made overnight. And I think it's something that the industry needs to look into. And as I mentioned, I think with continuous emissions monitoring, this will be something that people start to sit up and take notice of. These sheer numbers can reduce emissions quite as much as we can as well.
Now, looking obviously to the future, and we always like to ask this question, it's a little bit of a difficult one, but looking at a year or 2 years' time, what would you like to be telling me has changed in the industry? And what do you think you'll be telling me has changed in the industry?
Well, I think going back to the regulation, what I think is happening is good news. So
Yeah.
we've spent a lot of time talking about carbon and carbon credits and such like. They've been awarded to projects that are potentially going to abate some carbon in the future. What I think is happening is there's a push towards solutions that can make an impact today. And that's where I'm buoyed by the latest sort of Paris agreements and the discussions that are happening on that front towards things that can make a difference now. So I think in the next couple of years, we will see a push which is beneficial for Sulnox into those real world solutions that make an impact now rather than something of a hope for the future, which many of the alternatives are unfortunately still at that stage.
And we started our conversation talking about Posidonia. Presumably, you're still doing a lot of traveling, getting that message out. Are you still jetting all around the world, talking to people about their fuel? Is it a
Yeah,
busy time?
absolutely. So, given that it's a product that works for every combustion engine and every liquid hydrocarbon on the planet, there's a huge market out there for me to go and to introduce the products to. So, we're already sold in about 50 countries, and whilst we have a distributor model, it means that I still need to be in West Africa 1 minute and the United States or Canada the next. And then obviously I come to Greece about 4 or 5 times a year because of the fact that they have 20% of the shipping fleet. And
Yeah.
then obviously similarly for Singapore. But, the business is growing really fast in places like India now and South America. So, yes, I think that my wife is happy if I'm home every other week.
Well, Ben, it's been an absolute delight talking to you today, and fascinating stuff. And as I said, I think this whole issue of fuels and emissions and decarbonisation, we know it's not going to go away, but I think it's going to get even more interesting as the months and the years go by. There's going to be a lot of demands from all aspects within the industry, whether it's regulators or the charterers, for the right sort of change. And this is all very exciting. So thank you very much indeed for your time today.
It's been lovely to chat to you, Sean. Thank you ever so much.
And just to say to the listeners, as I said, there's a number of podcasts on our SMI shipmanagementinternational.com website. So please go ahead and listen on that, and invite any of your colleagues to download any of the podcasts that they might have missed. Fascinating stuff, and we look forward to welcoming you all again to our next podcast. But thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.